into it in a second. But I wanted to look at the closing arguments from the prosecution. Prosecution had a whole day yesterday to get their closing arguments in. As many of you know, today is going to be the defense's turn. We're actually going to get into the transcripts a little bit later from the defense and in another video, thanks to Inner City Press. But first, I wanted to see what the prosecution had to say during their closing arguments yesterday. Here we go. Shout out to ABC for this update.
Hi, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Thanks for streaming with us. The high-profile Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial now in its final stage. Prosecutors presenting their closing arguments today, this after more than 6 weeks of testimony, some of it very graphic. The jury hearing from more than 30 witnesses, including Combs' ex-girlfriends, former assistants, male escorts, security guards, even another rapper and rival. The prosecutor in closing calling Combs the leader of a criminal enterprise who didn't take no for an answer, saying Combs, quote, forced and manipulated Cassie Ventura and Jane to have sex with escorts for his own entertainment and used power, violence, and fear to get what he wanted. Combs is the only defendant, but the prosecutor told the jury he did not act alone, saying, quote, he managed to do this for 2 decades because he used his money, his influence, and his inner circle to cover up his crimes. It's his kingdom. Everyone was there to serve him. Combs' children were in the courtroom today, including his 19-year-old twin daughters who haven't been there since the first days of the trial. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison. Later in the show, we have YouTube star Tisa Tells joining us live to talk about the commentary surrounding this high-profile trial. But first, let's begin tonight with ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky live outside the federal courthouse here in Manhattan. And Aaron, prosecutors gave their closing arguments to the jury. What was it like inside the courtroom today?
First of all, Eva, it was packed. For the first time since the beginning of the trial, every member of the Combs family was there, all 6 of his children, his mom. They all crowded into the row designated for family. At one point, Sean Combs even seemed to be, saying squished together a little bit to make room. But there were attorneys for some of the witnesses. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton, was in the room to hear prosecutors give their closing statement. So it was packed. But for the start anyway, Sean Combs appeared pretty relaxed. He walked into the courtroom, he put his hand over his heart, a gesture toward his family, and he's been reading a book, The Power of Positive Thinking.
I'm curious, how was Combs? You mentioned it a little bit there. Did he interact any more with his family? What was his interactions with his attorneys like today?
A bit with the family. He did scribble a number of notes during the prosecutor's summation, writing them on little Post-its, handing them over to his attorneys. But at one point, I thought it was interesting. He sat far back, his chair pushed far back from the table, away from his usual confiding position with his attorneys, Eva, and had his head down, whether in thought or reading notes. But it seemed a moment where he might have been, as much as he can be these days, by himself.
I'm curious, Aaron, how long did the government's closing arguments take today?
It was almost 5 hours, and I have to say, it did not necessarily feel like it. The prosecutor's presentation for the last 7 weeks has been rather sprawling, and at times it felt disjointed. Witnesses testified that may or may not have had anything to do with one another. Today was the chance for prosecutors to try to tie all of that together, and all of the evidence about hundreds of freak-offs that the jury heard about.
And we heard this in several other commentators about what was going on during the trial. I think Harvey mentioned this over at TMZ. He said it seemed like there were so many loops that the prosecution was failing to close. And I think part of that is because there were so many people involved in this, and not from a criminal aspect, but there were so many, I should say, willing participants. And that's where things get weird. Because if someone was there, they wanted to be there, they were hired to be there, things get a little bit blurry. And it's harder to close the loop on Diddy just being this insane mastermind that was trying to build this criminal organization. I don't know.
Saw graphic footage of, and today prosecutors said a single freak-off is enough. That the jury just had to find that sex trafficking elements were met by prosecutors one time in order to convict.
Can you tell us more about the prosecutor who delivered today's closing arguments?
Christy Slavic is an experienced federal prosecutor. She actually has a background in gangs and violent crime. And I think of the 6, she may have been one of the more effective during examinations of witnesses, prepared, methodical, and that was, I think, the characterization today, a methodical, what they hope is a devastating portrait of Sean Combs, not only as a sex trafficker, but someone who led a criminal enterprise with a cadre of loyal lieutenants. It was his kingdom, she said. They were there to say yes, because she said over and over in a rhetorical flourish, Sean Combs would not take no for an answer.
The defense will have their turn tomorrow. What can we expect from the defense for their closing arguments?
Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo, lead counsel, is going to deliver the defense closing.
Nice.
He said it would take about 3 hours. I wonder now if he goes a bit longer than that. But the defense did not call any witnesses and relied on cross-examination to poke holes in the accounts of the witnesses. Look for him to repeat some of that and to portray Cassie Ventura and Jane not as victims of sex trafficking, but as willing girlfriends who participated in Sean Combs' polyamorous lifestyle for years.
And you know what? The interesting thing about this, I was surprised that the defense didn't call any witnesses. But seeing how things went, even in this Karen Reed trial, I'm going to be honest, guys. If the defense had rested as soon as the Commonwealth presented their case in the Karen Reed trial, I still was at the point to where I said, Karen Reed's innocent. The Commonwealth was supposed to have the burden of proof. They were supposed to show, hey, this is our case and we're able to prove it. I wasn't seeing it. And it seems like a lot of people are starting to feel the same way about this Diddy trial. Again, there's been scrutiny about what the charges actually are. Now the federal government is having to simplify that to help the jury understand what actually they're looking at. And then if you look at all the loops that weren't closed and some of the criminal activity they're alleging, they might be setting themselves up for failure.
Kontursky there at the courthouse for us. Thank you so much, Aaron.
Not to see.
Now to break down what we heard today, ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer is joining me. I'm curious what stood out to you.
I think what stood out to me and what probably stood out to a lot of people are all the different ways that Sean Combs can be found guilty, especially when it comes to that RICO conspiracy. Now, yesterday we talked about the fact that they just have to find 2 predicate acts, and it doesn't have to even be the same predicate acts. If we're jurors, I can believe it to be bribery and obstruction of justice. You can believe it's arson and sex trafficking. But even further into that, AUSA Slavic said, you know what? If you think there are 2 times that Sean Combs gave drug to someone else and there's a RICO conspiracy, that's enough. And so even within those individual predicate acts, multiple ones of them could carry the day for them in that top charge.
When it comes to a criminal trial, guys, I've talked about the civil side of things at length. We've covered and went through a lot of these civil cases that are being brought against Diddy. And from the civil side, it looks like a lot of these could probably be and will end up being settled. When it comes to the criminal side, on what we've covered and what you've seen, have you seen, going to the drugging, that Diddy has drugged multiple people? Have you seen evidence of that beyond a reasonable doubt? I don't know. The arson, we've already taught and had discussions about the arson. They're pretty much saying, we don't know about that one. Hasn't been proven that Diddy did that. The trafficking, y'all know how I feel about the trafficking. I think we need to find something else to put trafficking under, especially when you have willing participants and people who participate in these activities for pay. So again, what will the evidence show? We'll have to leave that up to the jury. But some of these things, especially if you're trying to find 2 of these predicate acts, I'm not seeing it.
What do you think that the prosecutor did today? Do you think she gave the jury a clear picture, a clear understanding of these charges, of this case?
I would probably use clear understanding, clear picture, but I'd probably go a little further, a roadmap. I think she gave them an excellent roadmap to say, if you follow these instructions, if you follow these facts, if you follow these elements, the only destination you can come to would be that Sean Combs is guilty of the charges. Talking about the RICO conspiracy, again, that only 2 needed to be done to find him guilty, so long as there's a criminal enterprise. But also the sex trafficking, that she conceded there might be some interaction between the 2 of them, especially talking about Jane, that first hotel night might have been consensual. But so long as there was 1 hotel night or 1 freak off or 1 King's night, whatever you want to call it, that's trafficking. trafficking. And the simplicity of that and giving 3 great examples for both Jane and Cassie, I think really helped in creating that roadmap for the jurors.
Let's talk about the idea of criminal enterprise, because a lot of people watching all of this have been asking this question. Well, what was the goal of a criminal enterprise? Does it have to show some sort of goal?
I think this is the perfect definition that AUSA Slavic gave. And the goal is to force and manipulate Cassie Ventura and Jane to have sex with escorts for his own entertainment. And everything else was either to control them, meaning that arson of blowing up Kid Cudi's car allegedly to control Cassie to come back in, getting the drugs and distributing them to both Cassie and Jane to kind of ply them into doing this. The acts of violence, all of it, right, it was meant for this goal. And they're saying that there was a meeting of the mind, an implied agreement between those in his inner circle, being Sean Combs, to do this very goal.
And yeah, Cassie's going to be, again, the main victim number 1 in this trial. What is her testimony going to say to the jury? What are they going to decide? How are they going to weigh that? Are they going to believe? And has it been shown that Cassie is actually a victim of that? I don't know. I think it's going to be tough. Y'all are going to have to let me know what you think about this in the comments in the chat. Seems like the prosecutors laid it out pretty straightforward. We'll have to see what the jury decides.